Hi, I work at this thing called Institute for European Environmental Policy. It's an NGO at one level, it's a consultancy at another level, and it's academic organisation at the other. We do a little bit of all those things. And it's significant, it's about Europe, because 80% of all the laws that matter about the environment are made at the EU level, and about 20% of them are made in the UK. Some of the people don't understand, it's not very well reported in the media. So big decisions about conservation, about climate, about waste policy, about water policy, it's all inside a European framework. And it's not something I particularly was pleased to discover when I got into this world, because it meant engaging in things which you wouldn't necessarily want to do, like going to all the meetings in Brussels. But there it is. If you see how decisions are made, you then have to follow through and see the consequences. I'm not going to have any PowerPoints, partly because pictures of myself at 18 are far too embarrassing, and partly because policy people don't all do pictures. What is policy? It's how you approach a subject, how you approach an issue, and we're mostly talking about how the government or how the EU or how the world approaches an issue, but of course it applies to companies, it applies to local authorities, it applies in your family, whether you decide overtly or covertly to meet breakfast or chuck the youngest into the swimming pool, provide them swimming lessons. That's a kind of policy. So in my day-to-day work, we're mostly dealing with policy instruments. So how it is that society engages in a particular subject. So it might be through legislation, it might be through taxation, it might be by doing absolutely nothing, it might be through doing incentives. I spent a lot of my life on incentives for farmers and agriculture policy. We heard earlier on that agriculture matters. I'm very pleased to hear that, because a lot of the actual management of the environment is done by farmers and foresters, and they are very, very sensitive to policy, because that affects the money that they get and the legislation they have to follow. So farming is a very policy-intensive area. Some bits of the world is not policy intensive at all. And what I'm going to just say to you in a few minutes is that for ecologists, policy is an interesting area, primarily if you're interested in trying to change the world, engaging the world, and it's a mucky business. We are rarely engaged with the truth. I like hearing from academics about how they're the people who know everything about a particular topic. In a way, that's what I dream of. I'm working on subjects I don't know very much about the topic. Someone's going to make a decision in 3 weeks, and we better try and make the right decision. And we better try and make the one which is actually achievable and the least bad outcome. And it needs ecologists, people who, A, are capable of understanding the world to that particular prism, and B, people who think about systems, who think about consequences, who think about ripples. That's what I like about ecologists. That's what you can bring to this particular party. It's a way of thinking about the world. Because policy is made up of a huge community of people. The classic disciplines would be economics and law. You've had a very traditional policy community in the civil service, for example. Those would be typical disciplines. But actually, all sorts of people, degrees in languages, degrees in history, degrees in physics, degrees in ecology, engage in policy. And in my particular organisation, it's about 35 people. I think we've got 10 different disciplines, including quite a few ecologists. And they get on absolutely fine with the economists and lawyers and linguists. And actually one of the pleasures of working in policy is you do meet people, all walks of life, all disciplines. And they get on together fine. Does policy matter? Yes, it does. Of course, it's a force for evil as well as for good. We're making decisions every day. Some of them are quite perverse. I went to a meeting, just to give an example, on Friday afternoon, the Department of Transport. We have a problem that there's an EU law which says that 10% of all petrol and diesel should come from renewable resources by 2010. Sounds great, very well-intentioned law. What has this resulted in? A massive increase in biofuel production, mostly through energy crops, some of it in the third world. This has had a lot of perverse effects. As we started looking at this, we realized that actually it isn't probably saving greenhouse gas emissions very much, it's having negative side effects. So we're looking at the alternatives, and we're frantically trying to see what are the alternatives. And this meeting was about, well, is it better to start incentivizing people, in other words, paying them good money to use fats, oils, waste products, bits of coconut, corn cobs, anything you like to mention, as a feedstock for fuels instead. And the Department of Transport haven't bothered doing research on the subject, to be perfectly blunt. They just got 17 stakeholders in the room, including me, and I had to do a paper on what we thought of 10 different feedstocks, which we started working on about 6 weeks ago, knowing nothing about whatever. And the Department of Transport will be going to a meeting in Brussels in about 4 weeks' time and pronouncing on what they think about this. This is how the world works. It's not ideal. It's not necessarily a pretty sight. But the outcome will be important. We suddenly will be incentivizing corn cobs or something else. And that decision will be made by people, some of them inside government, some of them outside government. The people who do policy are obviously MPs, members of the House of Lords, civil servants, and they're an important block. But there are also people in NGOs like me, people in universities. We've got a couple of speakers here today, Carbon Policy Debates. There are people in companies, increasingly in companies, to be blunt, because regulation is not in fashion right now. And there's a lot of desire to work with industry. And it's also made by people in consultancies. Consultancies are used a lot. In the European Commission, they have so few staff, despite what you read in the paper, and actually they have to subcontract nearly all the work on any substantive issue to somebody else, which might be a university, might be to us, might be to commercial consultancy. So a lot of the people who are actually inventing policy as we go along are coming from all sorts of places. And it is a good career because if it suits you, you can get to a place where you're in the room on the day where some decision is made. And you know why it's made, and who made it, with what background. And that can not necessarily make you feel it was the right decision, but hopefully help you think, well, we're going in the right direction, or we tried our best on the day, and that you were part of a set of decisions that really mattered. And I met somebody from the European Commission the other day who I hadn't seen for like 20 years, called Graham Avery, and I said, Graham, you actually ruined my life. And he said, why? He said, well, you know, in the middle 80s, I wrote this report. It took me 2 years. It was a desperately laborious job. And I documented why arterial drainage was taking place in the UK, Ireland, France, and the Netherlands, what effect it was having on biodiversity, why it was only taking place with EU money, and why it should stop. I took this book on. It was reviewed in the New Scientist by somebody who said, oh, this is fine, it'll never change the world. I was pretty annoyed. And I went along to the guy in charge of strategy and CAP in Brussels. He read it. He said, this is actually just what I need because we're fed up with these subsidies anyway. Don't like the environmental damage, but above all, I want to get rid of them. And I'll put this into our next strategy document. He did. And I walked away thinking, I've just changed the common agricultural policy. And this is possible in this remote machine to actually make a difference. And that might have been a bit of an illusion because I was probably just providing a little bit of evidence for its science. But it gives you an idea that you can, with a little bit of enterprise, with a little bit of enthusiasm, and a little bit of luck, you certainly need that in policy, make a big difference. Okay, as a career, what's it got going for it? What's it like? You have to be analytical. I'd say that's extremely important. You have to be certainly enthusiastic and very persistent. I agree with both the speakers who said that. But perhaps the analytical bit is important. You're not going to have much time to work out what the question is, how to answer it. You're going to be under pressure nearly all the time. Everybody works in policy. It's moving at a constant pace, and it can be pretty exhausting. It never ends. You never get to the pause point. There's always the next wave coming along. It's a good community. It's a social activity policy. There are enemies as well as friends. but there's a community. At the bottom of all policy decisions are usually quite a small number of people who are really, really involved in that. And some of them are people who know a huge amount about the subject, and some of them are people who just ended up in that particular job in DEFRA at the Target Environment Agency. It's not really an expanding market in the UK. To be blunt, the Environment Agency, Natural England, have policy jobs there. They're on the whole contracting rather than expanding, but there are some there. A lot of we're going to hear about consultancies later on today. Some consultancies are very involved in policy issues. In the government, there are clearly a large number of policy jobs. And in the EU, there are some brilliant policy jobs. Not being a European Commission official, you have enormous influence on the world. It's a brilliant job if you're interested in policy. And of course, some of you might want to be politicians. In terms of the what it's actually like, I think you've got to be good at basic academic skills, but also at engagement, also at communication. And my biggest criticism of the university, I've got to academics in the audience, they don't teach students to write. That's the #1 skill we want. We spend ages teaching people to write when they arrive. And we curse the universities because it takes us a heck of a long time to do that, because that's our main output, being able to write. And if you're putting in an application to an organisation like ours, you'll write it really, really well. Make it interesting, worry about the grammar, worry about the expression. And we get hundreds of applicants for jobs, that is typical of all policy jobs. And you need to just say something a little bit distinctive about yourself. Something just a little bit interesting as well as what you've done. Just to show that you're able to engage. You can imagine a policy world, you can imagine yourself as a player. Just a little bit of thought. How did I get into all this? Well, a little bit by trial and error. I was of an age when the modern environment movement was just starting, and the Club of Rome was publishing its manifesto. And I was sort of very inspired by the whole idea the world was running out of food, too many people. What did we do about that? I went to India before I went to university, and I went again when I came back. And I wanted to get a job. I did a postgraduate course in Cardiff, and I thought I could get a job working in development, actually. That's what I thought was the fucking. And I got persuaded by some guys, and I was doing some part-time work, trying to set this up. They said, well, why do you want to go to India? Why don't you haven't actually achieved very much in the UK and Europe? What have we actually achieved? Why don't you help us write this book on food waste? Oh, it isn't very glamorous. But I did. And we did this report. I was working with a guy from the university on this. And then I got a job actually working for the Earth's research department, because it was the time we were worrying about food waste, just like it is today. These issues come round and round and round. And some of our conclusions on food waste were extremely similar to the ones coming up today. And gradually I realized if I actually wanted to change the world with my skills, I don't know any ecology, actually, I should say at the beginning. Did physics and chemistry at O level, did a degree in economics and philosophy. What I picked up on ecology I've done along the way, and I've learned from my colleagues. But I know I need ecologists in my organisation. I need them as part of the mix. And I hope some of you will think about, well, this is an interesting, slightly offbeat form of career, but one that can be very rewarding.